We want, this much food.
A certain amount of cigarettes, certain amount of cigarette lighters.
Breakfast for the crew at 6 o'clock. We need
this much beer, this type of beer. We want
this much staging.
Everything had to be exactly just so. In order to make sure that the promoters read the writer thoroughly, in small print.
We want M&Ms, but with all the brown ones removed.
No brown M&Ms.
Well, if they're going to not read it,
If they made that mistake,
well, that means they're going to forget the 40 feet of staging or the 18 points for lighting. Band showed up, they saw brown M&Ms.
famous brown M&Ms.
Flip out.
Trash the dressing.
They trashed the room.
Most people just went there and did it on one weekend. You go out and you party, and then it took you a week to recover, right? We did it every night.
Van Halen led the way to all of us deviants. I mean, they lived life huge.
Through years of arduous practice and playing the backyard party and small club circuit around Pasadena, California, Edward and Alex Van Halen, Michael Anthony, and David Lee Roth earned the right to enjoy the spoils of their success.
We worked real hard at being able to do it, It's not like we were born with guitars and drums and voices that can sing, and like it was some gift.
And in the process, reinvented the landscape of hard rock music.
And when we heard Van Halen for the first time, it was like hearing Led Zeppelin for the first time or Jimi Hendrix for the first time. You knew it was something amazing.
And they were so fucking good, I had to hold on to my chair. I mean, they were full of full-blown energy non-stop.
Van Halen is a six-pack of beer, big-breasted woman riding down the highway, running over animals.
Pure, raw, unadulterated, great rock and roll music.
The girls wanted them, and the guys wanted to be like them.
I was 11 walking around the ghetto blast year listening to Van Halen.
I think rock and roll existed so that original Van Halen could exist.
The four distinctive personalities that would later ignite the mighty Van Halen first flickered into the world during a time when a hip-swiveling rocker known as Elvis was recording his earliest tracks at Sun Records, and Marilyn Monroe was making her debut on the cover of Playboy. In Amsterdam on May 8, 1953, Jan Van Halen, a Dutch clarinet and saxophone player, and his wife Eugenia welcomed their first son, Alex.
When you put on a Van Halen record, even if you don't know that it's a Van Halen record, as soon as you hear that, I know it's him.
Most drummers have a certain style. As long as I can remember, it was two kick drums. I always liked the sense of rhythm that a double bass player had.
Everything used to be so far out there, four kick drums, and the hi-hats were always way up here. So you're talking about a lot of this kind of movement with your hands, and a lot of that comes from show.
If a guy can develop a sound that is really identifiable, I think that's a big achievement, and I think Alex did that.
A little over a year later, on June 20th, 1954, Michael Sobolewski, who later became known as Michael Anthony, was born in Chicago, the second of 5 children.
I mean, if you seen him on the street, you wouldn't know that he was some fucking kick-ass bass player, you know what I mean? And he was.
Without that high voice of Michael Anthony, where would they have been?
Can't imagine that band without that vocal, without that high-pitched sound. And when you really look at Van Halen, it's the guitar sound, it's that snare sound, Michael holding down the groove, and that vocal.
A few months later, on October 10th, David Lee Roth made a flying leap into a prominent surgeon's home in Bloomington, Indiana.
If you fold the map in half, line runs right through Newcastle County, Indiana, where I was born. And my music always came from that.
I think the guy's a genius. He's the world's greatest entertainer that ever lived in my eyes. A lot of people will argue that with me, but one of the best frontmans you're ever going to see ever.
David is a party animal. Let's face it, today, wine, women, and song, you read about on paper, it's the same thing. He partied, man. Many days he'd take a chick out of here, come back 10 minutes later looking for another one. Chicks, 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 that's it.
And finally, on January 26, 1955, in Amsterdam, Edward Van Halen was born, the last member to form the mighty Van Halen.
You could always tell an Eddie Van Halen guitar, which to me is what makes a great guitar player. But he could do things technically as well, which is why I put him in, you know, in one of those top 10 guitar players in rock.
He has this part of his brain, which you would call semi-genius. He recognizes things very, very quickly that would take you and I some time to ponder on, or someone have to show us, or we'd have to go to school, or we might have a bit of it, and we figure it out later. He just goes, that, I know that, okay, fine, that must happen there.
He created his own guitar, his own sound, and his own feel and emotion. And that's what drew people to him, his uniqueness, his individuality. And he changed the way music was played in the 80s, the way music was heard in the 80s.
I couldn't believe that someone could make that awesome sound. He never made a mistake when he was noodling, and always hit every note perfect, and got better and better.
Early in their lives, Eddie and Alex's father began teaching his sons how to play piano. Mom provided constant encouragement and hopes that someday one of her boys might become a classical pianist.
Mr. Van Halen definitely played a major part in confidence. You know, he was a musician himself. And that house was always music.
The earliest memories I have, really, as far as musically, is that our father was into music, and you couldn't help but be touched by it. I'd watch him practice, I'd watch him play. Basically, Ed and I were surrounded by music.
America gained two of its most valuable musical imports in March of 1962, when Jan and Eugenia Van Halen settled with their two boys in the warm suburbia of Pasadena, California.
When we came on the boat to America, my dad would play in the band that was playing on the boat so that we could pay for our passage. And we were flat broke when we came over here. And Ed and I would play piano. Okay, here's my dad playing on stage with the band, making some money so we could pay for our passage. And then it was kind of a novelty to have two kids playing piano.
When they moved here, they didn't speak English yet, so Eddie and Al could only talk to each other for a while, and that made them really bond.
And when Ed and I went to school, the only barrier that we had was our language barrier. We couldn't speak the language. We knew, I think, two words: yes and accident. Accident was the first word in the book that my mother had bought for us to learn English.
Ed and Al were brothers, you know, they got along on a 1 to 10. They were always on 10, you know, they were a really tight family.
Oh, that brother thing was always there. They fought a lot, they loved a lot, you know, great family guys, you know, real loyal people.
My parents bought me a guitar, and they bought me a Silvertone amplifier, and I was playing the thing, and no matter what I tried, it just wasn't happening, man. Ed bought a drum set, and he had a paper route to pay for it.
The only honest job I've ever had was a paper route, and that was to buy a musical instrument.
While he was gone on his paper route, I'd be sitting there banging away on the drums. I really liked the drums. I don't know what it was.
One of the first things I remember is that Edward played the drums and Al played guitar. Come home from school one day and there's Edward on the guitar, Al's guitar.
I forget exactly how it happened, but eventually Ed and I switched. Ed played guitar and I played drums. I could tell by how he was imitating and listening to different people and being able to play the same thing that this guy knew what the hell he was doing.
When it came time to play around after school like kids do, Edward was always practicing, Alex was always practicing. They practiced at their small home in Pasadena, which wasn't big enough for a band to practice. So they'd find other people to be in the band so they could utilize the garage.
Michael Sobolewski also showed an early interest in music. Through his father, who played trumpet, Mike developed an appreciation not only for rock and roll, but for all styles of music, including jazz.
My father was